There are truck stops that feel like a party, blazing islands of light and noise. And then there are truck stops that feel like a church, quiet, still, and old. This place, tucked away off a lonely stretch of US 101 in northern Oregon, wasn't a stop. It was a cathedral. It wasn't made of stone, it was made of trees. And it was the most sacred place I'd ever rested my head. I was at the frayed end of a brutal 3-day haul, running a reefer full of California strawberries up to Portland. My eyes were burning, my spine felt like a bent piece of rebar, and my brain was buzzing with too much caffeine and not enough sleep. I needed to shut down before I started seeing phantom deer. So when I saw the small, hand-carved wooden sign for the Whispering Giant's Rest, I took a chance. I veered off the highway onto a narrow, packed-earth side road. It wasn't a stop. It was a clearing, a small patch carved out of a forest of titans. These were ancient redwoods, primordial, monsters of the natural world that made my 80-foot rig look like a child's toy. Their trunks were as wide as my truck, their tops lost in a low-hanging coastal fog. The moment I killed my engine, the silence was absolute. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a heavy, weighted silence that soaks up sound and memory. There were maybe a half-dozen other rigs parked there, all dark and silent, scattered among the giants like lost artifacts. There was no building, no fuel island, just a single lonely outhouse. It was perfect. This place felt safe. It felt protected. I climbed into the cab, feeling awareness so profound it was almost a comfort. I pulled the curtain that separates the driver's seat from the sleeper bunk. I laid my head down on the thin pillow, the silence a soft, heavy, welcome blanket. Before my thoughts could even fully form, I was gone, falling into the deep, black, dreamless sleep of the truly and utterly exhausted. The last thing I remember feeling was a sense of profound, almost religious peace. I felt like I was sleeping at the foot of God's own bedposts. I came to not with a jolt, but with a gentle drift. There was no sound, no sudden stimulus. At first, the feeling was tangled up in a half-formed dream, a vague, pleasant sensation of movement, of floating. My tired brain offered a perfectly rational explanation. It's just the wind hitting the broadside of the trailer, making the suspension sway a little. Perfectly normal. I rolled over, ready to slide back into unconsciousness. But the motion didn't stop. It was rhythmic. It was gentle. It was a slow, deliberate, metronomic back-and-forth rocking. It wasn't the chaotic shove of the wind. It was the steady, soothing cadence of a cradle being pushed by a patient and tireless hand. My eyes snapped open in the pitch blackness. My sleep-fogged brain was now scrambling. The reefer unit? No, that was a mechanical vibration. This was different. This was the whole damn truck. A 20-ton rig of steel and rubber being physically, tangibly moved. Rocked. I lay there, utterly still, holding my breath. I could hear it. The external proof. The soft, tired groaning of the suspension springs. Ee-aw, ee-aw. And the almost inaudible sloshing of the diesel in my tanks. This was real. I pushed myself up into my elbows, and then, as if my ears had finally tuned to the correct, impossible frequency, I heard the other sound. It was low, so low it was almost more of a feeling than a sound. A melody. Someone was humming, or something was. It was a simple, repetitive, heartbreakingly beautiful tune, like a lullaby from a half-forgotten childhood. The sound felt impossibly close, terrifyingly intimate, as if the person was standing right next to my cab door, their voice somehow seeping through the insulated steel walls. It was a pure,
clean, sorrowful sound in the otherwise dead, silent, ancient forest. I was instantly, painfully wide awake. The deep peace I had felt was gone, replaced by an ice-cold, razor-sharp dread. Who, or what, in the name of God, could rock a Peterbilt truck like a child's toy? And who would be singing to it in the dead of night, in the middle of a forest that time itself had forgotten?
I don't know how long I lay there, listening, feeling, a prisoner in my own bed. The rocking wasn't violent, the tune wasn't sinister, but their very existence was a fundamental violation of all the laws of the world that I knew. Finally, the simple, burning need to see became more powerful than the fear. I had to know. With a slowness that felt like I was moving through deep water, I sat up. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for the thick blackout curtain. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and with a single, decisive motion, pulled it aside. I peered out through the massive windshield into the sleeping, moonlit truck stop. And I saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. The clearing was exactly as I had left it. A pale, three-quarter moon had risen, and its milky light filtered down through the impossibly high branches, painting the gravel lot in shifting patterns of silver and absolute black. I could see the other trucks, dark and silent behemoths. There were no people, no machinery. The air was perfectly, glassily still. My eyes scanned the perimeter of my truck. There was no one there. I leaned over, craning my neck to see in my big side mirrors. I was alone. Utterly, completely, demonstrably alone. But the rocking didn't stop. Not for a second. And the humming continued, its gentle melody a constant, impossible, undeniable fact. I stared out at the trees, the great, silent giants. The moonlight made their immense furrowed trunks look like the pillars of some ancient ruined temple. And their branches, they looked different now. My panicked mind was no longer seeing them as just branches. The swaying shadows they cast across the hood and the roof of my truck, shadows that moved in perfect time with the rocky motion, looked like long, slender, grasping fingers, like the gentle, massive hands of a mother stroking the cab of my truck. A cold, impossible certainty settled in my gut. I was looking for the wrong thing. I was looking for something human scale. But the power needed to move my truck was all around me. It was the place. The humming wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from the woods themselves. A deep, resonant song sung on the breath of the entire forest. I wasn't being rocked by a person. I was being rocked by the forest itself.
The realization that the source was the forest itself didn't calm me. It terrified me on a level I didn't even know I had. You can fight a person. You can run from a person. But how do you fight a forest? How do you reason with something that has stood in silent judgment for 2,000 years? With a sudden burst of panicked energy, I scrambled from the sleeper buck into the driver's seat. The motion felt even more pronounced up here. The humming was louder now, pressing in from all sides, wrapping around the cab like a blanket of sound. The gentle rocking of the cradle now felt sinister, like the patient, hypnotic sway of a predator. My imagination started to feed me terrible images. What happened if I just let it continue? Would it rock me deeper and deeper into a sleep from which I would never wake? I had to do something. I had to do anything to break the spell. Honk the horn? Flash my lights? Both seemed so pathetic. What good would a horn be against a song as old as the mountains? Then the answer came to me, not as a thought, but as a pure gut instinct. What was the one thing that was the complete, utter, profane opposite of this place? The sound that defined my entire life. The engine. It was the truck's roaring heart, its mechanical voice. It was noise. It was fire and combustion and human ingenuity, everything this timeless, silent, natural place was not. It was a terrible risk. What if it made it angry? What if silence was a truce and the engine was a declaration of war? But staying here, a passive, terrified victim, was no longer an option. I took one more deep breath, bracing myself against the steering wheel, and I turned the key. The roar of the 15-liter diesel engine was an explosion of sound. In the cathedral-like silence, it sounded like the end of the world. It was a violent, angry, beautiful noise, a mechanical god clearing its throat. And in that exact instant, the moment the engine caught and roared to life, two things happened simultaneously. The rocking stopped. Bed. The truck settled on the suspension with a final solid thud. And the humming vanished. It didn't fade. It was just gone, cut off mid-note.
The cab was now filled with the familiar, comforting, deafening roar of my engine. I sat there, my hands gripping the wheel, my entire body trembling. I was safe, for now, but I understood the terrible bargain I had just made. I was trapped inside my bubble of noise. The moment I killed that engine, the silence and the things that lived in it would be waiting for me. I sat there for what remained of the night, a lonely, shivering sentinel in my rumbling steel fortress. I had my engine idling high, burning through a quarter tank of my precious diesel. It felt like an offering, a sacrifice of fire and noise to the ancient gods of the place. I didn't dare turn it off. The cab was warm and noisy, a vibrating bubble of civilization, but my eyes were glued to the windshield, watching the forest, watching the shadows. In the beams of my headlights, they just looked like shadows again, no longer like grasping fingers, but I knew better now. The deep, soul-level peace this place had offered was gone, replaced by a tense, wary respect that bordered on fear. The forest wasn't just a location on a map. It was a presence. It had rules. And rule number one, apparently, was be quiet. My roaring engine was a constant, deliberate, and necessary violation of that rule. It was my only shield against a silence that was very much alive. As the first faint gray light of dawn began to filter through the impossibly high canopy, I finally felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. The ancient, dark things of the world seemed to recede with the coming of the day. The stage was empty. The actors had retreated behind the curtain of daylight. I didn't get out to do a pre-trip inspection. The only security I cared about was putting that place behind me. I put the rig in gear, released the air brakes, and slowly pulled out of my parking spot. I drove out of that clearing, my engine the only thing making a sound in the quiet, misty morning. The other trucks were still there, still dark, still silent. A part of me wanted to lay on the air horn, to wake them, to warn them. But warn them about what? A dream? A lullaby? They would think I was crazy.
I didn't look back in the mirror as I pulled onto the highway. Some things are better left behind you. A few months later, I found myself sharing a pot of coffee with another old-timer at a brightly lit Flying J way out in Wyoming. He had that same road-weary 1,000-yard stare that I see in my own mirror. I don't know why, but I told him the story. I told it hauntingly, feeling foolish, expecting him to laugh. But he didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Ah," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "The Whispering Giants. Heard that story a time or two. You were, up in their house, and it's an old house. They don't mind visitors, but they can't stand the racket. They're old, son. They remember a time before engines. They like the quiet." He looked at me over the rim of his chipped cup. They didn't want to hurt you. They just wanted you to be quiet. That big, loud engine is a constant insult to their world, so they ask you to turn it off. If you do as they ask, if you join their silence, they'll grant you a peaceful rest. They'll even rock you to sleep. But if you don't, well, you found the other way. You have to shout them down all night as a toll for your rude passage. He was right. I finally understood the terrifying, beautiful logic of it. The forest hadn't been trying to harm me. It had been offering a bargain. You enter our silent cathedral, you honor our silence, you surrender your noise, you join the quiet, and in return, we will grant you a deep and peaceful rest. But if you refuse, if you insist on bringing your noise into our house, then you have to keep it running all night, burning your fuel and your nerves as a toll for your rude passage. I still drive that route up to Oregon sometimes. It's some of the most beautiful country a man will ever see. But I never, ever stop at the Whispering Giant's Rest anymore. And on the rare occasion I have to pull over for the night in a quiet, dark spot deep in the woods, I always leave my radio on. Just a low crackle of static, a small offering of noise to keep the deep silence at bay. Because I learned something profound out there. There's a big difference between a quiet place and a place that demands you be quiet. And you never ever want to wake a sleeping forest.